Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Janmadyasya Yato Anvayaditaratascha Artheshu Abhigyaswarat Tene Brahmahridaya Adikavaye Muhyanti Yat Surayah Tejo Vari Mridam Yatha Vinimayo Yatra Trisargo Mrisha Dhamna Swena Sada Nirastakohakam Satyam Param Dhimahi Nikamakalpataror Galitam Phalam Shukamukad Amritadrava Sanyutam Pibata Bhagavatam Rasamalayam Muhuraho Rasika Bhuvi Bhavukaha. We now enter the fifth chapter of the ninth Skandha of Srimad Bhagavatam. This is the conclusion of the story of Ambarish we saw in the last chapter. So, we saw that Ambarish was a great devotee who was a king as well, but lived and ruled without any attachment to his kingdom or all his powers, engaged all his senses in devotion, thereby the senses were naturally regulated. And he once, when he did fasting for Ekadashi, the sage Durvasa came, and before he could break his fast, because the sage came, he waited for him. He delayed, and in the process, he had to take water to honor the time of breaking the fast, for which the sage became unreasonably angry. And when he cursed Ambarish and sent an evil spirit to kill him, the protection of the Lord, called Sudarshana, in turn killed the evil spirit, and not only that, it started scorching Durvasa, and therefore Durvasa had to run. He went everywhere in the celestial regions with his yogic powers, but he couldn't find protection anywhere. Finally, he went to the abode of the Supreme Being, Bhagavan himself. It is said, and Bhagavan, very surprisingly, in a very beautiful way, says that this is being launched, the Sudarshana, because of my devotee being offended, and I cannot do anything about it. Only my devotee can handle it. So there Bhagavan beautifully said, Aham Bhakta Paradhino. He says, Bhaktair Bhakta Janapriya. I am completely taken possession by my devotees, and when it comes to my devotees, I have no control. He says he controls the whole universe, and yet the one who completely loves and surrenders unto him conquers him. So Bhagavan says, I am conquered and controlled by my own devotees with their love. Aham bhakta paradinaha. And therefore he says, I cannot do anything about it, because my devotees, they are completely surrendered unto me, and therefore they keep me in their control. He says, Vashi kurvanti mam bhaktya. He says they are holding me in their bond of love, that I have no power when it comes to my devotees, because they, with their love, have conquered me completely. He said, Sadhavo hridayam mahyam sadhunam hridayam twaham madanyat tena jananti naham tebhyo managapi. He said, their heart is me and my heart is them, and they don't know anything but me, I don't know anything but them. Therefore, when an offense is committed against my devotee who has fully surrendered everything, he has surrendered his possessions, his relations, his wealth, everything, and taken sole refuge in me, I can never give up on him, and therefore I cannot even overrule something that has happened because of an offense to my devotee. So he says the only recourse for you is to go to Ambarish himself, because he is the only one here capable of forgiving you. So having heard this, now Shuka Brahmarishi continues. He says, thus directed by the Lord, and still being scorched. So the Sudarshana Chakra is scorching with heat. It's not cutting Durvasa, because Durvasa is a great sage, but it is scorching him with heat that he is not able to bear it. So Durvasa runs back to Ambarisha and clasps his feet. It says, Ambarisham upavritya tat padau dukkito agrahithi, with great sorrow clasped the feet of Ambarish. So Ambarish, against whom Durvasa acted with so much arrogance and cursed him, and even intended to kill him with a curse. Of course, all that Durvasa did always, and not only in this case, but in every case, he offends devotees, and in the process he brings out the glory of devotees. So it is a mystical way of actions of Durvasa, the great sage. So here also Durvasa goes and clasps the feet of Ambarish, And looking at this, Ambarisha is now extremely ashamed, it says. See, Ambarisha is such a devoted being. He honors the great sages as the highest, so he did not get the least bit perturbed, disturbed, or angry at Durvasa showing anger to Ambarish. But Ambarish was, as we already saw, unmoved, and he simply did not even stir when he was cursed by Durvasa, and he had only the highest respect for him, and therefore he was now ashamed that this great sage is falling at his feet. It says Padas Parsha Vilajjitaha. Lajja means shame. So he was actually ashamed that his feet was being touched by this great sage. So he immediately moved away, and he recognized that he is now got to protect Durvasa because Durvasa is being scorched by Sudarshana. So Ambarisha offers a beautiful prayer to Sudarshana. So here, Sudarshana is the weapon of the Lord, and we have to understand what Sudarshana means. It's a very beautiful symbolism. Sudarshana is the discus, the weapon of the Lord, and the word literally means perfect vision. So darshana means vision, and sudarshan means perfect vision. So the word for philosophy in Sanskrit itself is darshan. So darshan means vision. So that's why philosophy is not some abstract mental speculation, but a way of seeing and living, is how the word itself is described in Sanskrit. And sudarshan means the perfect vision, which is the vision of the highest wisdom that cuts away ignorance. So Sudarshana is the discus which kills demons, and it symbolizes the killing of ignorance through perfect wisdom. So this Sudarshana is what now Ambarisha prays to. He says, beautifully, he offers a wonderful prayer to Sudarshana. He says, Tvam Agnir Bhagavan, Suryas Tvam Somo Jyotisham Patihi, Tvam Apas Tvam Kshitir Vyoma, Vayur Matra Indriyanicha. He says, you are like fire. So Sudarshana is fire, it's burning. That's why Durvasa is being scorched. And also symbolically, it's the fire of wisdom. And therefore, both literally and symbolically, it is fire. And therefore, it is Agni. So Ambarisha says, you are Agni, fire itself, the light that illuminates the sun, the moon, and all the stars. And you are all the elements, all the senses, all the objects of senses. So here he also, by this prayer, makes this beautiful expression that Bhagavan's weapon and Bhagavan are non-different. That is, the discus, the Sudarshana, is glorified as Bhagavan himself when he says you are all the five elements, and he will go on to glorify Sudarshana as the supreme being in all the ways, because when it comes to Bhagavan's paraphernalia, Bhagavan's energy, Bhagavan and Bhagavan's energy are non-different, because from the absolute perspective there is no duality, and also because the wisdom, the pure wisdom, that is the wisdom of Sudarshana, as we saw, Sudarshana represents perfect vision, perfect wisdom. It is non-different from the essence of the Supreme Being, who is Satchit Ananda Rupa, that is embodiment of truth, consciousness, and bliss. And therefore, Sudarshana is non-different from Bhagavan in every way. And so Ambarish says, you are earth, you are sky, you are all the senses. And he says, hail to you, O Sudarshana, Namastubhyam. He says, Sudarshana Namastubhyam, Sahasrara Achyuta Priya. You are dear to Achyuta, the immortal Lord. You destroy all ignorance of all beings, and you protect the earth and protect the universe. Therefore, he says, please be benevolent towards the sage Durvasa. Then he says, you are righteousness, you are truth, you are the faculty that regards everyone with the same eye, and you are the embodiment of sacrifice itself. You take care of the world. You are the self of all beings. So again, we see here how he glorifies Sudarshana as pure wisdom and also as non-different from Bhagavan. And that's why he says you are righteousness, you are truth, you are sacrifice itself, You are the controller of the universe. You are the soul of the all the beings of the universe. He says, Tvam dharmas tvam ritam satyam tvam yajna akila yajna brik tvam lokapalaha sarvatma tvam tejah paurusham param. So he goes on to glorify by saying, you are the supreme effulgence of the supreme being. I hail you as the upholder of all virtues. The fire of your disgust, your very fire, burns unrighteousness. He says, Namah Sunabha Akila Dharma Setave, Hi Adharma Shila Asura Dhuma Ketave. Very nicely rhyming verse. He says, Akila Dharma Setave, you are the protector of all dharma, and Adharma Shila Asura Dhuma Ketave. You are the destroyer of the darkness of adharma or unrighteousness. And therefore he says, you are possessed of the purest effulgence. You are the protector of all the three worlds. You are righteousness itself. You dispel darkness in all beings, and you remove ignorance in all beings. You are the very shield of the world. So all of this invokes the essence of Sudarshana, both literally as the most powerful weapon of the Lord and symbolically as the purest weapon of pure wisdom. And therefore he says, you are capable of removing darkness in any place and burning up ignorance in the form of demons. And therefore I plead with you, please grant safety to this sage, because he is a sage, he is not a demon. He might have committed a small offense, but he is a sage and you have to bestow his grace on him. And then he says, if any pious activity was ever done by me, if I have ever done all my duties correctly, and if my race has always honored sages and saints, then please relieve this sage of his distress. And finally, he says also, if the Lord of all excellences is pleased with me for the virtue of looking all living beings as his own embodiments, then please rid him of his trouble. He says, Yadito Bhagavan Prita Eka Sarvagunashrayah Sarvabhutatma Bhavena Dvijo Bhavatu Vijwaraha. He says, if Bhagavan is pleased with my vision of seeing everyone as the embodiment of Bhagavan himself, in other words, seeing everyone with the same eye, then may this sage Durvasa be free. So Ambarisha here offers such a beautiful prayer to Sudarshana. And Sudarshana is a very mystical aspect of Bhagavan. As we said, it represents pure wisdom. And therefore, when Sudarshana is invoked, it is said that it represents great power, it removes all obstacles, and it presents clarity at all levels. So there is in fact a famous prayer called Sudarshanashtakam, which is different from the prayer Ambarish offered. This is not in Bhagavatam, it was composed by an Acharya much later, which is also a very powerful prayer which is glorifying Sudarshana. And this prayer is also chanted by many to invoke Sudarshana again as the dispeller of all darkness. It is a very poetic and very rhythmic prayer. I'll just read the first verse of it. It has got 8 verses, as any Ashtakam does, and it has a beautiful refrain. This can be looked up. The first verse is as follows: Pratibhata Shreni Bhishana Varaguna Stoma Bhushana Janibhayasthana Tarana Jagadavasthana Karana Nikhila Dushkarma Karshana Nigama Sadharma Darshana Jaya Jaya Shri Sudarshana Jaya Jaya Shri Sudarshana. This is the prayer. The refrain is Jaya Jaya Shri Sudarshana Jaya Jaya Shri Sudarshana. Such a beautiful refrain. It has 8 such verses, all glorifying Sudarshana. So similarly, Ambarish here also glorifies Sudarshana. And Shuka Brahmarishi says, when Ambarish just thus glorified Sudarshana and prayed to Sudarshana to be benevolent towards Durvasa, immediately Sudarshana removed the heat and cooled down. And Durvasa now felt completely relieved and cooled down, and he was now freed of the scorching heat, and he was completely liberated from the oppression of Sudarshana. So Durvasa was now so happy. Finally, after running around here and there and coming right back to where he started, and recognizing that the only way for him is Ambarish himself, and Ambarish, out of his wonderful compassion, not the least bit holding anything against Durvasa, but only pleading with Sudarshana to be benevolent towards Durvasa. So, seeing this, Durvasa is completely melted. He glorifies Ambarisha so beautifully. He says, "Oh, how glorious is the devotee of the infinite Lord! That has been witnessed by me today, because you strive to do good even for one who has wronged you." He says, "Aho anantadasanam mahatvam drishtam adyame kritagasopi yad rajan mangalani samihase." Even though I did something very terrible, you want to do something very auspicious and pleasing to me without holding the least bit of grudge, but only with love and compassion. So, this is the greatness of the devotee of the Lord. He says, Aho ananta dasanam mahatvam drishtam. I've seen the greatness of the devotee of the Supreme Infinite Lord. He says, and therefore, what is hard to accomplish for such a devotee, and what is hard to give up for him either, because he has the Supreme Lord Sri Hari installed in his heart. He says, Dushkarah konu sadhunam dustyajova mahatmanam yai sangrahito Bhagavan satvatam rishabho harihi. He has got the Supreme Being, the guardian of all devotees, Sri Hari, installed in his heart firmly, and therefore there is nothing that is hard for him to accomplish, and there is nothing that is hard for him to give up either. What could there be, therefore, missing in such a great devotee? Now he glorifies Ambarish and all the pure, surrendered, loving devotees of the Lord. We already saw the Lord himself glorify his devotee, the greatness of the one who has completely surrendered to him, that he has conquered the Lord himself. And now Durvasa glorifies, he says, he has witnessed this benevolence. So this is the sign of a pure devotee of the Lord, one who is a pure sage, a pure jnani, a pure Bhagavata. All of these essentially are the same, because that means one sees everyone with the same vision, and therefore there is no grudge, no hatred, no vengeance, no remembrance of the past, only compassion and love, and that's what Ambarish demonstrates. So Durvasa says, what can be missing in the devotees of the Lord? Because they utter the name of the Lord, and that name rids everyone of all impurities, and the devotees who take the name with so much love, no wonder they have no impurity whatsoever. He says, Yan nama shruti matrena puman bhavati nirmalaha tasya tirthapadah kimva dasanam avashishyate. He says, there is absolutely nothing missing in the devotees of the Lord, because they take his holy name and they are always surrendered unto him. And therefore he says, O king, you are an extremely kind-hearted soul. You have saved my life. You have completely overlooked my offense. He says, Rajan anugrahitoham tvaya ati karunatmana. He says, by your excellent compassion, by your total compassion and mercy, your kind heart, you have bestowed your grace on me. So we can see how the tables have reversed. Ambarish was cursed very harshly by Durvasa, and then that resulted in being scorched by the heat of Sudarshana. Ambarisha did not stir. If Ambarish was approached immediately by Durvasa, he would have been immediately protected. But Durvasa didn't recognize the greatness of Ambarish, and he went all the way to Brahma, to Shiva, to Bhagavan Hari, and finally he was redirected back to Ambarish himself, and Ambarish was waiting there for Durvasa. He had not even eaten. We will see now that Ambarish was literally waiting there, because he is the one who keeps his word, and he has sworn that he will not eat till Durvasa comes back. And because Durvasa left, he was waiting there literally where he was left, and he was waiting with love and with eagerness to see Durvasa. And when Durvasa came in this kind of sorrow and trouble, he was only moved with compassion, and he, without even being asked, he would have done it. Durvasa, of course, right away came and clasped his feet, and immediately he prayed to Sudarshana and rid Durvasa of all the trouble. And that's why he is such a kind hearted soul. So the emperor hadn't even taken any food so far. And seeing all this, Durvasa was so pleased. So he said, I don't know how to even glorify you. I am out of words. And Ambarisha was simply waiting, and he said, no, please take your food. I'm waiting for you to take your food. And he offered the opulent meal that was waiting for Durvasa. Durvasa ate very happily, and then he was now fully gratified, and he said, please take your food now. I'm really pleased by the sight, touch, talk, everything that you have offered to me here. He says, Pritosmi anugrahitosmi tava bhagavatasya vai. He says, you are a great Bhagavata, and I am completely pleased and obliged by your every action here. Your sight, your touch, your speech, your hospitality, everything has completely moved me. Your devotion is unparalleled. He says, therefore, kirtim paramapunyam cha kirtayashyati bhuryam. He says, your glory, your blemishless fame will be proclaimed by earth for posterity to come. And that's what is happening even now. Bhagavatam, every time it's invoked, Ambarish Charitram is recited, and the greatness of Ambarisha is glorified till now because of this. So Ambarisha here demonstrates what is the quality of a pure devotee, a pure Bhagavata, who is also called a Vaishnava. There is a famous bhajan that many are aware of, which was written many centuries ago in Gujarati. And this bhajan exactly is applicable to Ambarisha. It's the most relevant set of verses here, and Ambarisha exemplifies it. The bhajan says, Vaishnava janato tene kahiyeje, पीड़ पराई जाने रे पर दुखे उपकार करे तोये मन abhiman na mane re. It says, the one who is a true devotee, true Vaishnava, he knows the pain of others. Pid parai jane re. And then he does good to others who are in misery immediately. Paradukke upakar kare toye. He always is ready to offer his help to those who are suffering. And yet, man abhimanana anere. He does not let a slightest pride enter his mind that I am helping. He recognizes that always everything is done by Bhagavan, his energy. So that's exactly what here Ambarish has done. He could not stand the misery of Durvasa. He immediately helped him, but he had not the slightest ego that he is helping him. He only wanted to serve Durvasa. And once Durvasa was freed of the trouble, he wanted to serve him further by offering him great food. And he was completely at his feet, just serving the sage Durvasa as if nothing happened. So this whole bhajan is a glorification of great devotees like Ambarish. And even if we have a small speck of the service and devotion and love of Ambarish, then we can consider ourselves to have the greatest blessing. So Ambarish is glorified thus by Durvasa, and having thus glorified him, Durvasa leaves, and it is said that he ascends to Brahmaloka by his mystic powers. And a long time had passed, in fact, because as we saw, when Durvasa goes to Brahmaloka and Kailasha and so on, we already saw that time is different in different realms. So time goes by longer on earth than those regions, and therefore very long time had passed, and Ambarish was waiting there, and Ambarish only ate after Durvasa left. So it is said that Ambarish, after everything happened, he considered everything to be Bhagavan's grace. It says, Risher vimoksham vyasanam cha buddhva mene swaviryam cha paranubhavam. He said the moksham, that is the liberation of Durvasa from his misery, and his own ability to remain without food for a long time and to wait and serve Durvasa, he looked at all of that and he simply said, how glorious is the Lord to make it all happen. So, this is why this particular bhajan is exactly what Ambarish is demonstrating. Mana abhimanana anere. He does not allow the slightest pride that I have done this to come. He looks at the whole thing and says, this is all done by the glory of the Lord, because that is actually the fact that everything happens by the energy of the Lord. The three gunas is what act, and when sattva guna acts, it acts in a particular way, rajoguna in a different way, tamoguna in a particular way. And when a devotee is completely surrendered, he transcends the three gunas and he acts out of compassion. And all of this is happening only by the energy of the Supreme Being. And therefore, he has the perfect vision. That is why he is endowed with Sudarshana. We already saw Ambarish is always protected by Sudarshana, which also means he has the perfect vision. So he doesn't allow the slightest pride to enter his heart, and he remains completely surrendered. Thus, possessed of all these great qualities, Ambarisha continued to rule after this particular pastime happened. And then it is said that being devoted to the Lord Vasudeva, engaging in all his duties, he continued to rule the kingdom while regarding everything, right from the most opulent to the most insignificant, as the same. And finally, as is the tradition of all the great kings we have seen in Bhagavatam, he also, after a certain age, leaves the kingdom to the care of his sons, who were all of good disposition, because we already saw even the citizens of his kingdom were so pious. His sons were very pious. So they were all trained by the greatness of the Mahabhagavata that Ambarish is. So he left the kingdom in charge of his sons and he retired to the forest and he fixed his mind on Vasudeva and he attained the eternal abode. It is said, Vanam Viveshatmani Vasudeve Mano Dadad Dvasta Gunapravaha. His cycle of births and deaths, it is said, came to an end and he attained the eternal abode by being completely devoted to Vasudeva. So with this episode concludes, this chapter also concludes, and Shuka Brahma Rishi himself glorifies Ambarisha by saying that anyone who recites and repeats and listens to this story of Ambarisha will become a devotee of the Lord just by listening and speaking of it. That's the glory of this story. He says, Iti etat punyam akhyanam Ambarishasya bhupatehe sankirtayan anudhyayan bhakto bhagavato bhavet. He says, the one who listens to this alone, this great story of Ambarish, he is sure to become a devotee of the Lord. So that's the blessing on all of us that that Shuka Brahma Rishi has given by listening to the Charitra, the story of Ambarish. With this most wonderful episode of Bhagavatam ends and this chapter ends. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.